I didn't see the lights first. I didn't hear the festival music either. What struck me was a small body curled on the frozen sidewalk. A Doberman puppy. Black and tan fur that should have gleamed, now patchy and filthy, soaked through. Ribs are sharp beneath thin skin, and in his back, 2 plastic syringes still stuck deep, plungers pressed all the way down. The sight jolted my chest with a pain I couldn't name. He didn't move. His eyes were half closed, lids trembling as if fighting the darkness closing in. On the concrete, fluid leaked from the punctures, spreading into a dark stain. I dropped to my knees. The cold cut straight through the bone, but all I could focus on was the fragile rise and fall of a breath that barely existed. I reached out. His fur was wet, cold as ice. His breathing was so faint it barely brushed my palm. No whine, no bark. Just silence. A silence I knew, if it held much longer, would turn permanent. Only after locking my eyes on him did I hear the world again. Laughter spilling out of a nearby bar, the staccato of high heels on brick, Christmas bells chiming from a corner. People passed, in a rush. No one looked down. In the holiday roar of Asheville, this puppy was nothing but a dim shadow, lost among lights and noise. I lifted my head, scanning. Above me, strings of red and green lights swayed in the cold wind, reflections flashing on glass storefronts. Across the street, a family clutched oversized bags, children tugging at toy boxes. Strips of paper reading "Holiday Sale" clung to winter coats. December in Asheville was always like this, bright, crowded, alive with motion. But through my eyes, it was all under glass, muted, blurred. I saw only the dog. My name is Michael Turner. I'm 57. I live on the edge of Asheville, fixing home appliances for a living. My days have been ordinary and quiet. Work in the morning, back home by late afternoon, dinner for 1, television flickering until sleep. I've crossed this intersection thousands of times, brushed past crowds chasing holiday bargains, but never once has my heart clenched the way it did now. I looked back at him, wondering how far those trembling legs had carried him before collapsing here. Maybe he chose this corner for the crowds, hoping someone would notice. But for hours, maybe days, no one had. Until me. This afternoon. For a second I thought of walking on, pretending I hadn't seen, going home to chicken soup and a countdown to the new year, but my hand stayed where it was, pressed against a shivering coat, feeling a heartbeat as thin as a thread, and I knew there was no choice left. The year's end chill blanketed Asheville. Low clouds. Smoke from wood stoves drifts over rooftops. I realized I was standing at a crossroads, not of streets, but of my life. Walk away and keep it all the same. Or bend down, lift this fragile being, and let everything change. I leaned closer, eyes locked on the 2 syringes embedded in the puppy's back. They weren't loose. Not accidental. They sat there like deliberate nails, deep, straight, plungers slammed to the bottom. What had been pushed into that small body, I couldn't say for certain, but it sure as hell wasn't medicine meant to save him. I'd read the stories, short, ugly headlines about people who use animals for cruel entertainment. They flick past on the news feed, a moment of outrage, then life pulls everyone onward. Now, what had been a headline was shivering in my palms. Real, right here. The puppy made no sound, no trash, only his chest, tiny, uneven, lifting and falling like a blade. I slid 2 fingers to his throat, searching for a pulse. There it was, weak, fast, chaotic. My own heart started to match it. Asheville buzzed on. Church bells swelled. A tinny Christmas carol leaked from a gift shop, and people laughed into scarves and pushed through pockets of light. The world was warm for those who had homes to go to. This life, this small life, had been left as if it never belonged. A slow, hot anger rose under my ribs. Who could do this? A puppy, months old at most, born to seek kindness, to chew shoes and steal socks, becomes a target, a receptacle for cruelty. I pictured him fleeing hands, paws skidding on wet concrete, dragging himself down sidewalks until his legs gave out in a corner where people hurried by, looking for a face, for mercy. No one stopped. The air had a knife edge to it. It hadn't snowed, but the cold chewed through coats. At this hour, the temperature would finish what poison had started. I had only minutes to choose. Options flashed. My truck was parked the other way. The Blue Ridge Animal Clinic, the closest vet I knew, was maybe 2 kilometers away. Call for help and wait. Flag a taxi and buy time. Either way, precious minutes slipped away. I didn't have the luxury of delay. I lifted him. He was lighter than I expected, so light it made me shudder. A 3-month-old pup should be squirming, biting the cuff of my jacket, full of impossible energy. This body hung limply, jerking only now and then like the last reflex of a failing system. I held him closer. His faint breath ghosted against my chest. A thought, cold and immediate. What if he stopped breathing in my hands? I could fix a motor, splice a wire, and fault-find a circuit. I'd spent decades repairing things that were broken. I wasn't used to holding a life that might snap. This was no appliance. This was a heart, a pair of lungs, a small will fighting the dark. And me, Michael Turner, had 2 feet and a stubbornness that usually got things working again. I looked down the street. Pack Square was thinning out. Neon bled across puddles. The old brick facades of Asheville loomed, dark and damp in the mist. The route was clear in my head. I had to move. Now. My pulse thrummed, not just from the cold or fear, but from a sudden, simple fact. I was no longer an onlooker. I was the tether, the only thing holding this life to whatever came next. Slow, and he would slip away. I whispered, though I knew he likely couldn't hear. Hold on, little one. We're not done yet. Then I drew a breath that burned in my lungs and set off. The cold bit. I didn't care. The truth was one thing only. If I did nothing, the puppy would die, and I could not let that happen. I held the Doberman pup tight against my chest, my palms pressed to wet, icy fur, feeling every tremor like a frayed thread about to snap. In that moment, the city roared in my ears. Christmas music, car horns, hurried footsteps, all collapsing into meaningless noise. Only the faint rhythm of his breath kept me tethered to reality. I knew exactly where the nearest clinic was. Blue Ridge Animal Clinic, a little over 2 kilometers away. On a normal day, I could stroll there in 25 minutes. But with a fading life in my arms, each minute was a blade. My truck sat back at home, in the opposite direction. No time to fetch it. Call emergency? Wait. Flag a cab? 5, 10 minutes gone. I didn't have that luxury. One line pulsed in my head. Either I run, or he dies. At 57, my knees don't love me back. Stairs creak under me now. But tonight I felt no pain, only a pressure, invisible and heavy, pushing me forward. Not because I was strong, because this puppy had no one else. I drew a deep breath, clutched him tighter, and started to run. December wind knifed into my face. I didn't care. My shoes struck the wet bricks of Asheville, my heartbeat sinking with the thud of each step. The city stretched like an endless tunnel. Somewhere behind me, people shouted, maybe surprised to see a middle-aged man tearing through the street with a limp pup in his arms. I didn't turn. I kept my eyes ahead, picturing the glass doors of Blue Ridge Animal Clinic. In my mind, Dr. Evelyn Brooks, whom I'd met once or twice when taking the neighbor's cat, was already there, gloves on, reaching out to take him. That picture was my only light, pulling me forward. I murmured as I ran, not sure if it was for him or for me. "Stay with me." Just a little longer, pup. Just a little longer. The small body twitched against me. I held tighter, as if by sheer grip I could anchor his soul. Ahead, the traffic light flicked red. On any other day, I would stop. Wait. But there was no other day. I glanced left, right, empty street. I shot across, heart hammering, breath turning to white steam in the cold. Voices rose, curses floated behind me, then dissolved. I cut into the alley behind the market, a shortcut I'd used when I needed to shave minutes off a trip. Shops had shuttered early, neon signs gone dark. Shadows thickened, but I saw every slick brick, every stripe of moss. I flew down the path, unaware that my legs even ached. In my head, numbers ticked. Hold this pace, 15 minutes. Push harder, maybe 10. But every second, whatever poison was in him spread further. I remembered farm poisonings I'd read about, minutes from breathing to silence. The thought chilled me more than the wind. I glanced down. His eyes stayed shut, but his chest still rose, shallow and quick. I whispered again, "Not today. You hear me? Not today. I'd never felt this fierce. I'd thought my life was set. A repairman, a small house, a few old friends. But now one truth burned through me. This life's fate sat in my arms. Slow, and he would vanish. Hold pace, and he had a chance. I stopped feeling pain, stopped thinking of cold, of age. There was only one command left: run. Scenes blurred past like a film on fast forward. The pizza shop I knew, the tiny bookstore on the corner, the statue in the square, all fading. Only a straight line remained, pointing to the clinic. And I knew, from the second I began to run, my life would never be the same again. My breath rang out in the dark like hammer strikes from a forge. Cold air cut my throat, burned my lungs, but I kept running. My arms locked around the Doberman pup so tightly I could hear his heart, fast, erratic, fragile. Each beat landed in mine like a weight. Faster, Michael, faster. I shot across Lexington Avenue. Christmas lights strung along the awnings still blinked. The little coffee shop I knew was shuttered, its Merry Christmas sign clattering in the wind. On any other night, I would have paused to watch the glow, to hear the jazz spilling from its speakers. Tonight, the whole city was just one endless hallway I had to sprint through. Faces turned as I passed. A few startled looks, a voice calling out, "Hey, everything okay?" I didn't answer. How could they understand? If they looked closer, they'd see the floppy ears, the limp legs, the twin needles buried in his back. But no one followed. No one reached out. It was just me, running alone down the street. At the next intersection, the light glared red. "Don't walk," blinked. I faltered for half a heartbeat, then my chest shouted, "Stop!" And he dies. I scanned left and right. Empty. I bolted, shoes slapping wet pavement, breath tearing out in clouds. A car horn blared from a distance, and headlights swept across my face, but I cleared the lane and kept going. I cut through the Grove Arcade. By day, it was packed with crafts, flower stalls, and food stands. Now only a few doors sat dark, scraps of wrapping paper scattered on the sidewalk. I ducked into the narrow back lane, shaving off a few more minutes. Streetlights pooled gold on slick brick. My shadow stretched long, warped, swaying with each stride. In my arms, the pup twitched. I glanced down, saw his thin eyelids flutter. My throat closed. I whispered, breath shaking from the run. "Stay with me, little one. Just hold on." We're close. The image burned in my head as clear as daylight. The glass doors of Blue Ridge Animal Clinic. The reception lit bright. Dr. Evelyn Brooks stepping out with steady eyes and gloved hands. I clung to that picture like a lifeline, but the clearer the picture, the sharper the fear. What if I arrived too late? What if all I handed over was a cooling body? The thought cut like a blade. I clenched my jaw and pushed harder. Red brick walls of downtown Asheville slid by. A graffiti-streaked wall. A bar smelling of smoke. A flickering open sign. I no longer saw places. The whole city had collapsed into a tunnel, and I was sprinting toward its end, where I believed one chance still waited. Pain began to climb my knees, seep into my calves. My breath rasped, knives in my lungs. But I didn't stop. I thought of winters past, sitting alone in a small house on the edge of town, coffee steaming, repairing an old radio. I'd believed my life would stay that way, quiet, uneventful. Now, in the heart of the city, I was carrying a fragile life in my arms. And I knew this single moment could rewrite everything. I forced myself to count. 1.5 miles left. At this pace, 10 minutes. I needed less. 5, 7. My heart hammered, sweat soaking under my heavy coat, though the air was freezing. A group of young men spilled from a bar, laughter booming. One caught sight of me running with the sodden puppy and blurted, "Oh my God!" Their voices faded behind me. I didn't stop to explain. There were no words, only action. I veered left, and there, the sign for Blue Ridge Animal Clinic flickered at the far end of the street. My chest tightened. Still far, but at least I could see it. That tiny glimmer of hope pulled my legs faster. In my arms, the puppy suddenly exhaled a weak sound. I bent close, hearing a thin wheeze like wind slipping under a door. He was still here, still fighting. I locked my jaw, whispering a promise. "You're not dying tonight." Not on my watch, and I kept running as if the whole city of Asheville had become one single track drawn between life and death. I slammed into the glass doors of Blue Ridge Animal Clinic, my breath hammering so hard it felt like my chest might explode. My trembling hand shoved the door open. The bell above it rang out, sharp, urgent, like an alarm. Inside, the receptionist looked up. Her eyes widened at the sight of me clutching a limp, tiny body, twin syringes still buried deep in its back. I couldn't breathe enough to form a sentence. Only a few words were torn out. "Help! He's dying." A figure I knew moved quickly from the hallway, Dr. Evelyn Brooks. Her hair tied back, her eyes bright and hard as steel. I'd seen her before, but never like this. Focused, razor sharp, without a flicker of hesitation. She didn't ask questions. One glance at the pup's back, then her gloved hands dragged a metal gurney forward. "Set him here." Now I laid the Doberman puppy on the gurney. His weight, so light, stabbed my heart. Cold metal met wet fur, and his body jerked weakly. Evelyn's voice was clipped, solid. "Remove the syringes. Get IV fluids. Oxygen mask. Stat." A nurse rushed in. Gloves gripped the syringes and pulled them cleanly. Pale brown fluid oozed out, its acrid smell filling the room. My stomach turned. Evelyn frowned but didn't pause. "Flush the wound. We need to counter whatever toxin this is." Before my eyes, the room became a battlefield. Fluorescent lights glared down on stainless steel tools. A monitor beeped erratically, lines jittering. The pup's heart hammered wildly, off rhythm like a drum gone wrong. I stood near the door, fists clenched until my nails dug into skin. I wanted to reach out to touch him, but I knew there was nothing I could do except watch. A thin tube slid in. An oxygen mask sealed over his tiny muzzle. An IV line was found on his foreleg, with clear fluid dripping steadily. Evelyn's gaze never left the screen. Each beep, beep, stretched like a lifetime. Then suddenly a shrill alarm. The line on the monitor trembled, then went flat. Blood drained from my face. All sounds folded into a roaring hush. I heard Evelyn bark. "Cardiac arrest! Epinephrine now!" The nurse handed her a syringe. Evelyn drove it straight into his small chest. Her hands began compressions, steady, strong, relentless. No one spoke, only machines, ragged breaths, and my heart pounding out of control. I forced myself to watch even as my chest felt crushed. In that instant, I thought, maybe he's gone. Maybe I'm too late. But then, a faint beep. The line nudged up, fragile but real. Another beep, longer. Evelyn paused, eyes locked on the screen. The line began to flicker again, weak but coming back. The room exhaled, but no one slowed. New syringes, new drugs, suction tubes, and the second needle wound were flushed. Everything orbiting that tiny body is like a miracle being wrestled back from the dark. I stepped back, hand over my mouth, my vision blurred. Sweat or tears, I couldn't tell. Maybe both. Evelyn glanced at me, voice short. "He's not safe yet. Possible brain damage, organ failure. We'll know in hours." I nodded hard, afraid to trust my voice. Only one fact mattered. He was still breathing. Through the glass of the ICU, I watched him lying still, wires and tubes wrapped around his small frame. The monitor's glow washed over damp black and tan fur. The sound, beep, beep. Steady now, fragile but persistent. It was proof he was still here, that the fight wasn't over, and I swore I would stay right outside that door until he opened his eyes. I don't know how long I'd been sitting on that hard plastic chair in the hallway. Outside, Asheville's winter night lay still, Christmas lights blinking on the bakery window across the street. In here, there was only one soundtrack, the steady beep, beep of the monitor behind the glass. Each tone reminded me that the Doberman puppy was still here, still not giving up. The first day drifted past like a dream. Through the pane of glass, I could see his small body lying still on the metal table. IV lines and an oxygen mask covering most of his face. His black and tan coat was patchy, dull. His back was bandaged where the syringes had been pulled. Red seepage still dotted the gauze. I stared at every rise of his chest. Sometimes the breath caught, and my heart stopped with it. Dr. Evelyn Brooks came to stand beside me, her voice low and steady. "It's a waiting game now. His body's been through hell. Brain damage is possible. But as long as there's rhythm, there's hope." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. As long as there's rhythm. I repeated it like a prayer. On the second day, I arrived before dawn. I put my repair shop on hold, sent a few messages to regular customers without explaining. How could I? How could I tell them I was sitting beside a puppy not yet 3 months old, talking to him as if he could hear me? I pressed my palm to the glass and whispered, "You're not alone. I'm right here." A nurse passing by gave me a small smile, but no one mocked me. Here, silence was the shared language. Each day I brought something small to leave outside the glass. The first day it was a faded blue scarf my mother had knitted long ago. The next, a worn rubber ball from the neighbor's cat. I thought, if he wakes, he might like it. Another time, I bought a small gray blanket from the pet store, folded it neatly in the corner at the nurse's suggestion. I wanted him to feel there was a home waiting. The bills grew with each day. I opened them, watched the numbers climb, felt my stomach knot. My savings were meant to get me through the winter. The moment I caught myself thinking about money, I felt ashamed. Money could be replaced. This life couldn't. If I had to, I would sell off tools, even the old truck. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't so poor I'd let a life slip away in front of me. On the third night, I dozed off in the chair. When I woke, my neck stiff and my eyes burning. The sound of the machine had worked its way into my veins. I stepped up to the glass and whispered, "I'm sorry. I should have stayed awake." He lay still, no response. Yet I swear for a second his chest lifted stronger. Maybe it was a trick of the light, but I clung to it. Dr. Brooks met me the next morning. Her face showed fatigue, but her eyes held firm. "He's fighting." He made it through another night. That single sentence was enough to hold me upright another day. Time in the waiting room stretched without end. I told him small stories through the glass. The rice cooker I fixed last week, the regular who always haggled over prices, the smell of coffee I'd left half brewed at home. I didn't know if he heard, but silence felt cruel. My voice might be the thread holding him here. One day, a family brought a sick cat and sat beside me for hours. They left with worried eyes. I stayed. A nurse murmured, "Most people don't stay this long." I gave a thin smile. Most people don't see what I saw. At night, I left late. But every time I stepped into the parking lot, I turned back, just to make sure the light in his room still glowed. Each glow, each beep in the dark, held me together. On the fifth day, Dr. Brooks told me his liver and kidney numbers had shifted. Small gains, but real. Tears blurred my vision before I could stop them. A number, a cold statistic, had become the warmest light I'd ever seen. I no longer thought about the holiday outside. No countdowns, no wine glasses, no parties. My whole world had shrunk to 4 white walls, a pane of glass, and one small life inside. Each morning I woke with only one question. Will he open his eyes today? And I swore I would be there until he did. On the 8th morning, I walked into the clinic the same way I had every day, clutching a cheap cup of coffee from the corner store. I was used to the sight through the glass, a still body, machines keeping time, a sleep so deep it felt endless. But that morning, as I set the cup down, something shifted. The monitor still went beep, beep, but the rhythm was stronger. I frowned, stepped closer. Then I saw it. The small flicker I had prayed for through every hour, every night. A tiny ear twitched. I thought I'd imagined it. I leaned in, holding my breath. Again, a second twitch. And then, slow as dawn pushing over the mountains, eyelids began to flutter. A thin crack opened, revealing eyes clouded but alive. My chest jolted. My voice came out in a whisper, trembling. "Hey, you're back." The small head shifted, hazy eyes searching toward me. No bark, no real movement, just that faint gaze. But to me, it roared louder than words. Dr. Evelyn Brooks appeared, studied him, then gave a rare smile. "He's waking." That's a good sign. I pressed my forehead to the glass, drawing in a breath so deep it almost hurt. I had feared for so long I'd never see those eyes again. Now, they were looking at me. That night I didn't leave. I sat through the late hours, filling the silence with stories, as though the gap between us needed to be bridged. I told him about mist clinging to the roof of my cabin, about the time I burned a rice cooker by accident, about my childhood dog, Scout. He didn't respond, only blinked slowly, but I knew he heard. His eyes held me, wordless, like a thread. The days that followed, he healed bit by bit. First, a twitch in his paw. then a clumsy attempt to sit up, only to fall back. I cried like a boy. A nurse chuckled softly. "You're taking this harder than most owners." I shook my head. "He's not just a dog. He's a survivor." Weeks later, I carried him home. In the truck, he lay on the gray blanket I had kept beside him at the clinic, his head resting on my arm. I drove the familiar mountain road, the cold wind against the glass. In the rearview mirror, I saw wide brown eyes catching the light, no longer hollow, but alive. I named him Valor, because to live he needed more courage than most people ever find. Life changed after that. Each morning, Valor shuffled into the yard with me, his legs still shaky but steady. While I worked with old appliances, he curled under the table, lifting his head now and then as if to check if I was all right. In the afternoons, I tossed him the worn rubber ball. He chased it awkwardly, joy spilling from every stumble. And every night, when I sat on the porch, he settled at my feet, head resting on my shoe, breathing steady. Sometimes I'd watch him and think of that night, when I cradled a cold body on the sidewalk while the city rushed by. I thought, if I had turned away, I'd still be living quietly, but hollow. Because I bent down, because I chose to run, I had Valor. And Valor had me. I realized then, the bond between people and animals doesn't need words. They don't speak, but they look into your eyes, know when you hurt, know when you're tired, know when you need a reason to keep going. Valor taught me that, not through language, but by simply being there. Sometimes strangers would ask, "What's his story?" I would smile, scratch his head, and answer, "He's a fighter. And he's family. We can't save them all. But when a trembling life appears before you, waiting for a hand, you can save that world. And in doing so, you just might save a piece of yourself." Tonight, I sit on the porch, Valor curled at my feet. The air is cold, but I am warm. I listen to his breath, steady and sure. I whisper, "Thank you for staying. You changed me." He lifts his head, brown eyes glimmering, then gently lays his chin on my knee. No words needed. I understood it all. Thank you for walking with me to the very end of this story. Valor, the Doberman puppy I found on a frozen sidewalk, did more than survive. He taught me love doesn't need language, and a single touch, a single choice, can change two lives forever. If this story touched your heart, please leave a note of love, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so we can keep spreading kindness together. Every view, every message from you is the reason we continue telling stories of hope, of survival, and of the invisible bond that ties us to the voiceless. From my heart, thank you. And remember, one hand, stretched at the right moment, can save an entire world.